Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Assembly Judiciary. Welcome to everyone here in Carson City and anyone who may be watching online or in through YouTube or Nellis. I know this is the first time we've had a committee since last week, so it feels like everyone's yes, nodding their heads. So everyone's back. So with that, Secretary, please take the roll.
Assemblywoman Bilberry-Axelrod, Assemblywoman Cohen, Assemblywoman Considine, Assemblywoman Gallant, Assemblyman Gray, Assemblywoman Hanson, Assemblywoman Hardy, Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch, Assemblywoman Marzola, Assemblywoman Mosca, Assemblywoman Newby, Assemblyman Orentlicker, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, Assemblyman Urick, Chair Miller.
Here, and please mark Assemblyman Ornlecker present when he arrives. Of course, we have people moving all over the place in different committees right now. With that, just a few reminders, asking everyone to remember to turn down their volume on any electronic devices. Again, we will have public comment at the end of today's hearing. And with that, I don't think there's much else to add. We have one bill today, and members, there is an amendment that was sent in on that one bill as well. Today, we're hearing Senate Bill 294, presented by Senator Donate, and co-presented by Samantha Bivens, who I believe is on Zoom. Senate Bill 294 revises provisions relating to the safe storage of firearms. And with that, Senator, your hearing is open, so once you all get settled, you may begin.
Good morning, Chair and members of Assembly Judiciary. For the record, my name is Fabian Danyate, and I'm proud to represent Senate District 10 in the heart of Las Vegas. I come before you today to present on Senate Bill 294, which revises provisions relating to the safe storage of firearms. For this hearing, I am honored to be joined by a family friend, Ms. Samantha Bivens. She is a constituent that brought to me this issue, and so I'm going to try to do my remarks as quick as I can. That way you guys can all hear her personal story as to why this bill is important. Today we have an agenda to just quickly go over. I'm going to spend some time just reviewing the language of Senate Bill 294 and the reprint that is before you today, the implications that we have on public health, and then I just want to clarify for you what's happening on the ground as we focus throughout the state. There was a conceptual amendment that was submitted from the Firearms Coalition, which I hope they're here to present on their behalf. It was submitted to me for consideration of this committee, but the purpose of my presentation will focus more on the bill language.
Senator?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you consider this a friendly amendment?
I do consider this a friendly amendment. Thank you. Senate Bill 294 is, as I mentioned, it relates to the safe storage of firearms. Primarily, it adds language starting on Section 4 that each licensed dealer shall provide with each firearm sold or otherwise transferred a locking device capable of securing the firearm, and that they must post in a conspicuous location on its premises any dealer that has essentially a sign with the notice of negligent storage of firearm may result in imprisonment or fine. Just a little bit of background on this bill. This has been a conversation that we've had for a few years now. There were bills that were considered before the legislature back in 2019, AB 153 and AB 291. That bill would require that, it was signed by then Governor Sisolak, and essentially that bill would require that if you had a child underneath the age of 18, that you would have to safely store your firearm. The bill before you today does not make any changes to that law. It just essentially adds a provision that I believe, which is making sure that firearm owners, when they go and purchase a firearm, they understand what the law is. And that is part of the requirement of putting notices. Currently in this state, no law requires that unintended firearms to be stored in a certain way, but we also do not have any statutes that they have to be sold with a locking device, which is part of what the bill in front of you entails. We have seen nationally an increase since the COVID-19 pandemic of firearm deaths that have increased steadily. And part of that, of course, is due to the mental health crisis that our children face. And similarly, we know that death by suicide is also increasing with firearms. There are bills that have been passed nationally that consider a wide range of policies and initiatives. As you can see in this map, there have been considerations for safe storage across the state and also for locking devices to be sold with the firearms. Touching point specifically on Nevada, because I know that's one of the main important slides. The fact of the matter is, children are still bringing guns or firearms to schools, and so from August of 2022 to February of 2023, which is when the bill was presented on the Senate side, there were 29 encounters with a BB gun, an air gun, and 26 encounters with a handgun. I broke this down for you based on elementary school, middle school, and high school. So for elementary school, we did have one child bring a gun to school. Middle school was 4, and then high school was 21. Similarly, children and teens in Nevada, I know it's important for just to share local statistics versus national statistics. Between 2014 and 2018, firearms were the leading cause of death among children and teens in Nevada. And so this is an imperative thing for all of us to take seriously, considering that they are bringing these to school. When I had presented this in Senate Judiciary that same week, just a few days before, there was this news article that said one person was detained after police responded to a report of a person bringing a gun to school at a Las Vegas high school. And so it's a very real scenario. And when you look at the tweets that were placed, you can see that families were rushing to their kids, trying to make sure that everyone was safe. But then families also complained that they weren't giving any notice or communication as to what was going on. I think that itself is probably a pause of reflection that perhaps we need to do a little bit more coordination with one another between local law enforcement and school police, particularly in CCSD, and especially for larger school districts. And what I believe is that we should have mechanisms in place to communicate to parents when situations occur like this emergency. And similarly, I firmly believe that with provisions of this bill, in general, we should have some level of response to students and faculty and staff that have been exposed to community violence, whether it's in their community or at their local school. We should have strategies that, that essentially are trauma informed, so that we appropriately respond to each other when these situations are encountered. Overall, I firmly believe that students and teachers deserve an environment that is safe and free from violence, and that I believe this bill can help not just inform firearm owners as to what the law is, which is important as part of the provisions, but also making sure that our system is just a little bit better coordinated. And then at this time, I'll go ahead and turn over to Ms. Bivens to present her remarks.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
For the record, Samantha Bivens. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you regarding this important legislation today. My name is Samantha Bivens, and I'm a Gold Star wife and a Blue Star mom, and I'm an ardent supporter of the military and veteran community, as well as student safety. I first became passionate about student safety in 2015 when I was serving as a senator in CSUN student government at UNLV with Senator Donate. During my tenure, I was the proposing senator of a proposal to upgrade the emergency phone system on campus and funding, filming, and the implementation of the Run, Hide, Fight active shooter training video, which is still used on campus today. In 2022, in anticipation of the upcoming legislative session, Senator Donate and I began talking about collaborating on legislation in relation to active shooter training in K-12 settings, as well as the safe storage of firearms. The bill before you today is the result of that collaboration. I believe that training our children on the most effective ways to react in an active shooter situation is critical to survival. Additionally, as the owner of many firearms myself and an individual living in a home with several school-aged children, I take my responsibility to safely storing these weapons very seriously. You've heard the statistics nationwide as well as in Nevada from Senator Donate. These numbers are unacceptable. I don't believe that curtailing the ownership of firearms is the solution, but we can not continue to stand by as more people die. Providing active shooter training to students and faculty can save lives. Mandating firearm locking devices at the time of a gun purchase can save lives. And imposing consequences for the failure to safely store firearms can save lives. Having successfully drafted, presented, and had legislation passed before this body in the past, I have learned although having a bill come to fruition can be difficult and contentious, the process can have a positive outcome. I'm certain that we can all agree that we want to see all children protected and kept out of harm's way. We can strive to work to that end if we support legislation that makes sense, is comprehensive, and is written to satisfy lawmakers and stakeholders in the firearms industry who sit on both sides of the aisle. I'm asking you all to please look at SB 294 with thoughtful consideration and to work together to ensure that gun violence doesn't continue to rob our children of their lives and others of their peace of mind, security, and innocence. In closing, I'd like to share a few quotes. These words represent the thoughts of two men, one a Republican former senator and the other a Democratic former president. The goal with a big piece of social legislation is to have a bipartisan result so that the country will accept it. Senator Lamar Alexander. A good compromise, a good piece of legislation is like a good sentence or a good piece of music. Everybody can recognize it. They say, it works. It makes sense. President Barack Obama. It's time to come together and change the narrative. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Fabian Donate, for the record. Chair, if it's okay, I would like Mr. Morley just to explain the conceptual amendment that he had requested. That way the committee members understand and the background for it.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Morley for the record, representing the Nevada Firearms Coalition. This amendment simply states that if you're traveling from your vehicle into a shooting range or to a shooting exhibition, that you wouldn't get a felony if you had your firearm locked in a box and it wouldn't be considered concealed. And we just don't want to see people basically getting charged with a felony for simply transferring from the vehicle and to a shooting facility.
Chair, that concludes Fabian Donate for the record. So that is a conceptual amendment that has been shared with me, but foremost, the presentation for us concludes Senate Bill 294, and we're happy to answer any questions from the committee members.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, our first question will come from Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you. I didn't expect for you to come to me first, so sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you for this bill. I was a primary co-sponsor on the bill in 2019, and so I guess we didn't think this one through. So I think this is a great idea. I'm just curious, can you go over like the cost of the locking devices, and then is it the onus is on the gun buyer, I assume, to buy it? I'm sure they come in a range of options because you mentioned biometrics, which, so if you could just kind of give me that scope. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fabian Donate for the record. So in Section 4, subsection 4B, it defines what is considered a locking device. It can be key, combination, biometric data, or other similar means. The locking devices, if you go on Amazon, can be as simple as something as $5. So it can be very simple. Most firearms often come with one already. And so you would pretty much, when you go and purchase this would now put a requirement that it comes with the firearm that you're having. So it doesn't really set a parameter as to what the minimum or what the maximum is. If you already have one, in general, if you have a safe at home, that's fine, but this just comes with you when you purchase this firearm. The analogy that I would make is when you purchase an iPhone, it comes with a charger, right? It's an accessory to it, and that's simply the same way that I would approach the scenario.
I'd like to follow up on that, though, because with your example of the charger comes with the phone, like that's part of what the manufacturer, what the company does, they provide it, but this sounds like the purchaser would have to purchase the lockbox?
Thank you so much, Chair Fabian Oñate, for the record. So what this would come is essentially if you are a firearm dealer, before that you would have to, in addition to notifying them like this is a requirement in state law to have safe storage if you have a child under the age of 18, that they would also have to sell you at the same time a locking device if the firearm already didn't come with it, depending on what you purchase.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Senator Oñate, I've got to correct you. Bought a new iPhone 14 last month, and guess what? It only comes with a cable now and a wall charger. But I on this one though, this is already federal law. This was passed by the Child Safety Lock Act of 2005, and I buy firearms from time to time, and I don't remember the last time one didn't come with a lock. So I'm really wondering why we need this in state statute if dealers are already risking something much more valuable than $500. They're risking their federal firearms license by selling a firearm without a lock. I mean, to me, this is not only is it duplicative, but it's also less of a threat to them.
Thank you so much, Fabian Oñate, for the record. Assemblyman, that was a consideration that came forward. The thing that I had to come in mind was what you don't want is a scenario where it's not as a common practice, right? And I think probably the most important thing is the notice of making sure that folks that go and purchase these items understand what the law is. There has been a question of whether or not compliance is in effect, simply because, as I presented to you, there are Clark County students that are bringing them to school. There's obviously some level of ramification that could exist as to if Safe Storage has been acting the way that we intended it to. And so as a way to help us get there just a little bit closer, it would just allow us, in partnership with the firearm dealers, to just post the notice that this is happening. But to your question, that was something that was brought up. It being duplicative, I think it's just us codifying that this is the standard practice for us in our state.
Our next question is from Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for bringing this. As a teacher, I think this is very important, and I have some questions on the school portion. So on page 6, I'm looking at subsection 3. It says that we have to ensure a pupil's parents or legal guardians are notified of a crisis, which I appreciate. But I would like to know if you thought about including staff in that. As a teacher, I have been in an actual code red. We had a student bring knives to school. We weren't told that. We thought there was an active shooter, and we literally, every staff member passed our phone to the students to say goodbye to their parents. We stood at the door ready to fight someone off. I mean, it was 4 hours of terror for every staff member, and we were not informed anything that was going on. And so I wondered if you would be open to maybe adding staff being informed as well, because it seems obvious, but we're not always informed.
Thank you so much for Fabian Oñate, for the record. Absolutely, if that's something that the committee would like, I think that's appropriate to consider. So I have family members and close friends that are educators as well, and I've asked them, if there was a scenario where you had a shelter in place outside of the announcement that they make, like, do you actually know sometimes what's going on? And oftentimes you don't. So you are correct. I think there's a strategy that we need to do to help ensure our educators understand the scenarios that are in place. And then similarly, if there, for instance, was an encounter that happened, perhaps if your classroom faces the outside neighborhood and you saw something happen outside, like, how do you navigate that type of situation? Might not be in the school, but you still have to deal with the ramifications of your students being exposed to that. That actually happened to my cousin. She was an educator at Peterson Elementary School. And there was a shooting right in the corner of the parking lot of the school, and because her classroom faced the outside, that was a difficult conversation that she had to have with their students, which is kind of the reason why I felt that there should be some parameters in place to help not just staff and educators, but pupils who have been exposed to community violence. Maybe it's not in the school, but it could be in the local vicinity. And if that is of the consideration of the committee, I'm more than welcome to add that as well. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much for the second. So my other question is about the training. So on sub 1, it talks about coordinating with local law enforcement agencies to provide active assailant trainings to each employee. And we go through Code Red drills, and we do have trainings on this. But I have seen in some districts across the nation very intensive, I would say traumatic trainings of students where they simulate an active shooter, but they don't tell the students this is a drill. I mean, it's really pretty traumatizing stuff that our elementary kids go through. And so I just want to make sure that is not what we're looking at, and make sure there's some parameters so that we are getting training, but we are not traumatizing kids so that they are afraid to go to school.
Thank you so much for that question, Fabian Nunyate, for the record. That's correct. So the way that I wrote the bill was essentially codifying what CCSD already does, which is law enforcement and the local administrators are the ones that should be going through these trainings so that they understand the scenarios that could occur should they occur. I did not want students to have to go from the original reprint. We've learned that we don't want students to go through these trainings because oftentimes, you're right, they do induce some level of trauma. And so we believe that it was appropriate in the other sub-bullet points to look at developing, like as I mentioned, trauma-informed and age-appropriate responses to students that have been exposed to community violence. That is probably the first step. But for the police officers that work for the school district, they should have this already in their training if they weren't already.
Thank you. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. Can you go back to that slide which talks about the childhood deaths leading causes guns here in Nevada? Of course, I forgot my glasses today. So you said 2014 to 2018 leading cause of death among children and teens in Nevada. Can you tell me where you found that data? Because just quickly looking like on the Department of Children, what was it? Sorry. The Division of Children and Family Services, I was able to find the 2018 and 2019, and it shows natural causes as actually the majority of deaths. So I'm just curious where you got those numbers and if you could send those reports, because I'd be concerned if guns are leading the way with influenza, SIDS, and various other diseases that typically take young children.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fabian Nunyate, for the record. So on the bottom of each slide, I've included the source.
Yeah, I can't see that.
Yeah, it's everything. But I'm happy to send the presentation over to you.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Our next question is from Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And hi, Senator. It's good to see you. And thank you for the work that you've done on as the bill has come over here. I've gotten more comfort with it, and I appreciate you working with a lot of other people. A couple things, if I could, real quick, to follow up on the conversation that was just had. I think it's always really important to kind of clarify. Certainly, we are all very concerned about any time a child's life is lost. And that when it comes to guns, we kind of change what is a child. Typically, we think minor under 18, but when it comes to gun, and this isn't in relationship to your slides, but in the gun discussion about loss of life with children, the age moves to 21, typically in gun stats. So that gets into what we would term adults, but we, for some reason, categorize it as a child, and a lot of that is gang violence. But going to this specific, let me double check my note that I had. So I understand it. You're looking to really codify a lot of things that are already happening, correct? Particularly on the plan for school districts. It's my understanding that Clark, Washoe, I know with Washoe, they have a regional active assailant response program that they all are trained in and coordinated with our outside law enforcement. One concern I've heard is sometimes for school police, they are trained and they understand how their buildings work, and are we going to have them help train outside law enforcement? We're not looking at asking outside law enforcement to train our school police, right? Because the school police and that agency kind of understand their footprint, the working with students and all of that. That would be my major concern is who's training who.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Fabian Doñate, for the record. So to your first point, yes. So a lot of this is already standard practice, so it'd be codifying. I took a lot of the provisions of this bill from the active assailant trainings that CCSD already conducts. The slide that to answer like who's responsible for the training, et cetera, with this particular scenario, when I presented this in Senate Judiciary, the problem that we encountered was not in so much of training between each individual institution, but rather so the coordination between each other. And so what we had was Metro showing up at the same time as CCSD police, showing up at the same time as other law enforcement entities, and there was like a lack of coordination. And so my goal would be not just to continue what we already have, but also to help the coordination so that when these situations are encountered, we know how to appropriately respond to them and work with one another. So that's essentially my ultimate goal.
Just a quick follow-up. And yes, I can see, and unfortunately, we've seen nationally that there is that, understandably, almost like a panic, and they're trying to work the best they can within this horrific situation. Do we have anybody from the school? I know we have CCSD here, but do we have any law enforcement from Clark? I didn't see Washoe. I'm just curious if we could get an understanding of who takes charge in that situation. When all of these agencies arrive, are they then do the school police lead the coordination? Just maybe you know that, but just would like to have that answered, whether now or offline.
Thank you so much, Chair Fabian Doñate, for the record. I don't know the answer to that. I know CCSD is here, but I don't know if they are able to respond. But
Right.
we can respond offline if that's
That will work. We'll respond offline on that. And I guess that just brings up one question for me too. Actually, I'll wait to see if someone else is going to ask it. But yeah, we'll move on. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'd like to ask about Section 10, Sub 3 in particular, but the whole section about suicide, because we know that gun deaths, that suicide is frequently attributed to gun deaths. And so what is that? Can you just give us some more information about those community programs that are out there to temporarily store firearms to try to help people when they are concerned about their the state that they're feeling and where they are in their lives?
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Fabian Doñate, for the record. So this part of the provision is what other states have passed, which is they work in consultation with their departments of health and human services to post information as to like, here's the requirement of this particular law. If you find yourself in this particular scenario where you're feeling suicidal or you need some level of help, here are the resources that you can contact depending on what part of the region you are in the state. In addition to that, they also develop education materials just as to like what is appropriate in terms of storage. And of course, with the implementation of 988, this would also have the ability for crisis intervention should you feel in that circumstance. It's important to know that I think suicide is also a big public health concern, and so we want to make sure that folks are adequately prepared and that our state is providing that information publicly so that if you find yourself in that situation, you have the help that you need.
Our next question is from Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for bringing this bill. First, a statement. I just happened to register my kids for CCSD for the next school year yesterday, and I noticed among all the different things that you have to click on and acknowledge, there is a statement in there about safe gun storage when you register your children. But my question is actually in, let's see, I'm just going to give you the page. Page 6, subpoint J, that has it listed as 50,000 pupils or more. So school districts that have more than those number of pupils. And I was curious as to why that level was selected, because all of these things seem like good things for any district to have.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Fabian Doñate, for the record. I think that was more so of the offline conversations I had with both Washoe County and Clark County School District. There are provisions in that section where they will have to develop good practices as to like communication with parents, et cetera. And so I feel part of the strategy was if they can start off learning as to how they can develop good support mechanisms for their staff and their students and appropriate communication responses, then that could be translated to the rest of the state. And so if everything goes well, then we can roll this out in the long term to the rest of the state. And that's my ultimate goal. There's one thing, as you may know, not all school districts throughout the state have police officers. Some of them contract with local law enforcement, and they have very populations of who's covered under who. And so we figured that starting off by the 2 major school districts would work first, and then we work to help the rest of the state.
And that actually was my question, Assemblywoman Newby. So I figured somebody would get to it. And that was my question as well, because as you've already mentioned, it's more about codifying, and often when bills come, I don't want to give the impression that this stuff isn't happening, because Clark and Washoe are doing much of this. You know, there are drills that happen with students. There are parent links that go out to parents to let them know immediately. Now I agree with the Assemblywoman. It's the staff who doesn't always know what's going on. But you know, that communication's going out. We have training. We have crisis teams. We have evacuations, reverse evacuations for every scenario. We even have principals that do additional procedures within their buildings, whether it be not letting the students use their lockers or not letting students bring bags in, you know, whatever they can to do to reduce it. So it is interesting that it's only going for the 2 schools who most likely already have so much of this in place, where I would think maybe we should be addressing the smaller school districts who may not have as sophisticated plans or practices, or as you stated, even police officers. So could you speak to that, why we wouldn't just be including all of our schools? Because I see in here too as well, you mentioned charter schools. And if we look at the charter school as one, you know, the Charter School Association as one, they would probably cross, I think they cross about 50,000 students. But without, and leaving our other districts out, could you just speak to that, why they're not automatically included?
Sure. Thank you so much, Fabian Doñate, for the record. I think it was more so in terms of implementation. It'd be more difficult to implement it across the state, given that there's a lot of differences between each of the different school districts. And I think there are, as I mentioned in the presentation, there is a gap. I didn't want to say lack. There is a gap of coordination that exists between law enforcement and school police officers, and there are improvements that could be made between communication to the actual community. And so I think there are still some gaps that we can solve first at the larger school districts, and once we identify those gaps and the appropriate ways to respond to them, we might come to the determination that it requires more fiscal resources, or that there wasn't an identified good training mechanism, or perhaps it's just the onboarding of technology to help the dissemination of information to faculty and to parents. And so there are a lot of potentials that could exist just with enacting this provision for larger school districts. And so my hope would be, before we start to tack on to smaller school districts who may not have the ability to expend these funds, that we could start off at the larger school districts and then work our way down. So, but I understand the sentiments as to why are we leaving some behind? And it's, there's, it would make sense as to why you would come to that conclusion.
Yeah, one more quick question on that. In your research of the school districts, did you find that the smaller school districts, did they have things in place already, or like in comparison to the larger school districts, which ones did you feel were more sophisticated or robust in their plans?
Thank you so much, Chair, for the question. Fabian Dunyati for the record. I think it was a mix of both. So it just depends on the school district themselves and how many students they have. For many of them, they just charge that responsibility to local law enforcement because that is who they have contracted. Some already have some local provisions. All counties, as you may know, have to, as part of the Department of Education, when I spoke with them, they have local county officials that do emergency preparedness, and this is part of the emergency preparedness plans. Their notification is that they focus on all types of emergencies, not just one in particular, because they need to be prepared for any particular scenario. So most of this has been covered in some way, but it just depends on in terms of the smaller school districts, it's varied depending on their size and what their partnership is with local law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Assemblyman Urick.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Senator. It's nice to see you. Mr. Morley, Ms. Bivens, thank you guys for the presentation. I also want to comment and tell you I really appreciate your willingness to work on this bill as originally presented to try to strike the appropriate balance, because really the challenge here is, and I think what you're attempting to accomplish is commendable. We need to figure out how, and educate people on ways that we can provide safer storage of firearms. I think as originally presented, it was challenging because we're trying to find that balance between safe storage and quick access to the firearms when those that carry them need them, particularly in self-defense situations, right? And so I appreciate greatly, because as originally presented, I was looking at it going, ooh, this is problematic for somebody like me to look at that and see it's really going to hurt people that need to have those access to weapons. But again, the aim here is commendable. And by the way, the idea, I agree with my colleague that the requirement to sell for a licensed dealer to sell firearm to an individual is a bit redundant, because federal law currently does provide that. That's why most people are getting them with the locks, and they do range in prices. But we know that 18 U.S.C. 922 does cover that. So it's a bit duplicative, but I'm okay with it. And then, again, I think our negligent storage of firearms laws are good under NRS 202-300. So I say all that to say I really do appreciate it, and I was really, and by the way, let me also just comment very quickly. As a prior law enforcement officer, I was a SWAT operator when Columbine happened, and let me tell you, that changed the nature of police response to these types of scenarios. And there has been a concerted effort, I don't know about up here, but certainly down south, to improve those responses. And I think we have come a long way in responding to these types of school shootings and things like that. So anyway, and I agree there's a gap, I think, that can be closed to improve those types of responses with school district police officers and law enforcement. And law enforcement, local law enforcement knows that these school police officers know their campuses really well. And so there is a coordinated effort. I actually am good with that part of this bill as well. So all of that to say, I was good, and then we get this friendly amendment. So Mr. Morley, my question is probably more for you, because as I look at this, we're going to transition and deal with firearms when we're talking about in the homes, and by the way, the education of reminding parents about how to store them to keep them from coming to schools. As we look at this, you would kind of pitch this like it's an attempt to help people that are going to gun shows carry their guns in and out. This appears to me to put us more in line with California law that basically requires you to have a concealed weapon permit to carry, or it would be considered concealed if it was not either locked up or put in the trunk. But now this is striking that difficult balance again, right? And it's concerning, and I'm hoping you can address it. So if this was in place, would an individual without a CCW that is carrying a firearm for self-defense, would they not be able to have quick enough access in a self-defense scenario if it was involved in a motor vehicle? And I think you understand my question. Can you address that for me?
Certainly, sir. We simply want to make sure that somebody would not catch a felony when they're transferring from their vehicle to a shooting facility or to a shooting competition. When it's locked in a box, or when it's locked in a safe container. The definition really, yeah, we just want to make sure that you're not going to catch a felony when you're just transferring from place to place, and it's not considered concealed. Does that answer?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. And that's what I thought I heard you say. I don't know that upon reading of this amendment, which is basically a copy of California Penal Code put into this scenario, and so maybe, Senator Donati, maybe you can address it, because I like the idea of protecting people that are just coming to gun shows and doing stuff and safe storage for that. But it looks like this is basically clarifying that if this, this doesn't prohibit somebody from carrying a firearm in this state if they're 18 or over, whether they're whether they're a resident or they're temporarily in this state, from carrying a gun in or to or from a vehicle. It says as long as it's locked or in the trunk or to and from if they don't have a CCW, which this doesn't sound like it matches what you're intending it to do. So as written here, it sounds like it's going to put us, basically, as I look at this, it almost looks like unless I have a CCW, I can't even carry a firearm to a motor vehicle, to or from a motor vehicle, unless it is locked up in there. So that would mean open carry to and from a car would be prohibited by this. So I didn't get that that's what you were trying to accomplish, but this, as written here, is concerning. So I think we maybe need to have conversations offline if that is the intent, to address and make sure any sort of provision there to protect that felony charge under scenarios like this doesn't prohibit somebody from having ready access to a firearm for self-defense purposes when they happen to be in or around near a car.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman Fabian Donati, for the record. When I was approached with this conceptual amendment, I thought it was, the way it was presented was that it would close a loophole that we've seen across the country. And so I'm more than happy to help work with you to rewrite this amendment so that it satisfies your needs and it can help. So I don't know if that can be happening offline or if you have any further questions.
Would you like a follow-up, Assemblyman?
I think that the follow-up is probably going to be appropriate, because I do agree that this amendment as written isn't accomplishing, I think, what the intent is there. And I would be more than willing to have conversations offline to try to come up with something that may help address that without, again, crossing that line of the balance that I think your bill was really achieving.
And I appreciate that, because I feel it is difficult when we just take another state's law and then, and I know that's not what the plan would be. Obviously, LCB would write it and craft it. But those are my questions too, because trying to imagine the different scenarios between open carry and CCW, and it's my understanding if someone, well, it's just my understanding that either way, that whether under either way, that individual would have protection, especially, I mean, they have protection, period, but if going to a gun show, going to purchase, going to the range, we're not saying they're going to prohibited areas where they're not allowed to carry originally. So if we could get the clarification between, and just kind of look at both scenarios to see the necessity of this. Because then I could also bring in excuse me, my Midwest roots and ask about hunting, just kind of, if we could look at those scenarios, okay? Thank you for that. Our next question then is from Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, the first question I've got refers to your slide, page 9, your statistics, and Assemblywoman Gallant got me thinking about this. So the stats are from everytownresearch.org. They have an agenda. I'm not going to say they're biased, but they do have an agenda. So I wanted to fact check that against the CDC's website. And so over their longitudinal study from 2011 to 2020, an annual average of 27 Nevada children and youth aged 0 to 19. So it's a much larger demographic. Age 0 to 19 died from all causes of death involving firearms, homicide, suicide, accident, etc., according to the CDC and prevention data. So, I've got to kind of question that data, and maybe it's because there's just such a small sampling and a time that it works. But just wondering if you know that. And then there's a part two to this question, a real easy one. Who do you imagine enforcing this law with the signage? I can't see uniformed officers going into gun shops and doing that.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman Fabian Nanyate, for the record. So with regard to your CDC data, I actually, in the interest of time, I took off the slides that were nationally, and some of those remarks actually came from the Kaiser Family Foundation, so I'll make sure that you get those data points. I understand the sentiments of where this data was gathered, but I did collect other points that were more from the federal government, and so I'll make sure to send that to you post-presentation. With regards to the enforcement of it, I think it comes down to really, and I think this is probably an appropriate response of like the public and the private industry coming together to help enact legislation. I think that for this particular response, we have seen, like I mentioned, across the state where students are bringing them to schools. And so I believe that as appropriate that in working with the coalition that this is something that would be followed. And in terms of enforcement, I don't know if legal counsel could respond. It's in the provision, but. I believe it actually, I just really, sorry, that is my mistake. In section 4(2), a licensed dealer who violates any provision of section 1 is guilty of a misdemeanor and shall be punished by a fine of not more than $500. So that's the enforcement mechanism.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that's the penalty phase, but I mean, who's going to walk in there and cite them? I mean, I can't see uniformed officers who are busy enough going into gun shops looking for violations.
Chair, if we can have legal respond.
Well, basically, it's a crime, so local law enforcement is who would enforce it. What kind of priority they would make of that, it's obviously a policy choice, but it's a crime like any other crime.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Briefly.
That's so you went directly to my point. I mean, is it really going to be, like I said, they're already meeting the lock requirements. The ATF does a very good job of actually enforcing that, going in and doing inspections, making sure these guys are compliant with their FFL, which is a very hard license to get. And I'm just wondering if we're passing a duplicative law that it has penalties, but will never get enforced because there's just not time or the wherewithal to do it because of other things going on.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman Gray, Fabian Nanyate, for the record. Once again, I understand the sentiment of duplicating federal law with requirements to locking devices, but I think, again, as I reiterated, the new portion of this bill that is important is making sure that firearm owners are being understanding of what the law that has been passed in this state. And so we have set the provisions in here to enforce this. This is what has been enacted in similar states. Whether that comes down to the policy priority, I think that's more of a question for law enforcement. But at least we're doing our part to making sure that everyone in this state understands the law that you have to follow, which was already signed in. So that's part of the rationale for that.
And also, just for clarification, the federal law only only pertains to handguns. Okay, and we all just ponder that. So it's just handguns, and of course, there's a number of different styles of firearms. I don't see any additional questions at this point, so we can go ahead and open it up for testimony. We'll start here in Carson City. If there's anyone that would like to come and support Senate Bill 294.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Francesca Petrucci here, representing the Clark County Education Association. We represent the 18,000 licensed professionals in the Clark County School District. We support Senate Bill 294, and we thank Senator Donate for bringing the bill forward, as well as engaging in conversations with several stakeholders. the number of firearms that have been found on CCSD campuses is, I believe, 33 by the close of this school year. That's according to what was on the website, on CCSD's website. Any provision that can prevent even one of those from entering a school campus is critical. Why? You mentioned Columbine. It only takes one. And so when we talk to educators and students, there is a feeling of unsafety. And it's warranted because we're seeing, an increase in the number of firearms that have been found on campuses. And so it's only a matter of time until, it's too late. And so any provision that can prevent even one of those from being found on a campus is worthwhile, even if it is in some cases duplicative. And we're working on school safety legislation as well in this session. This is supplementary to, not duplicative of, those efforts. And I want to share why. This is data from every town as well, Assemblyman Gray. But 3/4 of school shooters acquired their firearm from the home of a parent or or close relative, and an estimated 50% of gun owners do not safely store their guns, even though research has shown that households who lock both their firearms and ammunition were associated with a 78% lower risk of self-inflicted firearm injuries in general, and an 85% lower risk of unintentional firearm injuries among children and teens, specifically compared to those who safely store neither. And so again, we're even talking about preventing at least one from getting on these campuses. So we urge your support. It's very timely. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. I'm here today to show our support for SB 294. I want to thank Senator Doñate for bringing this important bill forward as a gun owner. Something has to change. It starts with prioritizing common sense gun violence policies like this one. We want to give Senator Doñate credit for approaching gun violence from a public health lens and for prioritizing the safety of our communities. SB 294 seeks to make our schools safer, protect our young people, educators, support staff. After we've seen numerous school shootings and the presence of guns in our schools over the last year, it is our position that we must look for every possible solution to stopping this violence. We urge the committee to move this bill forward and continue taking gun violence prevention seriously. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Patricia Haddad, Director of Government Relations for the Clark County School District. As you heard, this codifies policies that are essentially already in place in many ways, and we're in support of this legislation. Thank you.
Not seeing anyone else here in Carson City. Broadcasting, will you open the lines, please?
To testify in support of Senate Bill 294, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Okay, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. Then I will open it up for opposition testimony. If there's anyone here in Carson City that would like to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 294.
Barry Cole, C-O-L-E. Don't ask about the hair. There's a story.
And we know there isn't, but we all like it very much.
Thank you. My opposition is more about this 50,000. My grandson goes to Fernley Middle School. You may remember 2 months ago, another classmate brought a semi-automatic pistol to Fernley Middle School. Thank God the magazine had been removed while the young man was brandishing his weapon and showing his classmates. My grandson was sitting there with one son between them. At State Mental Health, when I was working at Northern Nevada Adult Mental Health, we had an episode in 2016 where a gentleman was quite unhappy outside of our building with a pistol walking around, and I had to remove my patients into an inside corridor so that he couldn't shoot through a window. Now, that's the second episode that I've been involved with, because if you go back to the late 80s, 2 of our psychologists were shot on the campus of Northern Nevada Adult Mental Health Services. One was my own personal team psychologist, Ingrid Moore, and wouldn't you know, the shooter was the husband of my patient. So this is real, and our kids are living with this every day. It's not that I have any opposition to the bill. I want to get it to where the number is, if you have a school with 1 student, you need to be doing this and thinking about this right now. It shouldn't just be Clark County and Washoe get to have all the resources and the other 15 counties don't. I think we have a statewide problem, we have a national problem. And just to let you know, I was in rural Pennsylvania 2 weeks ago, and they were giving away free locks for your firearms when you went to the gun store. When I did with my sister and brother-in-law, we were looking at some interesting firearms because she has a farm. And yeah, in her box, she got the locks with the weapon, but they gave away free locks. And they in Pennsylvania have a sign up about state law requiring safe storage. So I think we'll all agree about that. My only objection is, please lower the number to, if you have a school with any kids in it, we'll follow these same guidelines, because practice will help, I think, in the future to not have kids with PTSD after these shooting events happen. Having been locked down a couple of times, it freaks me out, and I've supposedly got a lot of mental health training. So I ask you to kind of think about it and make one last revision, and I'm happy to work with Mr. Donate or anybody else to get this.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say, Doc, the hair is absolute fire.
We do appreciate it. It's a beautiful shade, and it matches your tie perfectly. With that, is there any other opposition testimony here in Carson City? Okay, broadcasting, will you open the line, please?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Then I will go ahead and open it up for neutral testimony, starting here in Carson City first. Not seeing anyone. Broadcasting, will you open the line?
There are no callers at this time.
Okay, then I will welcome the senator back up for any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Chair Fabian Iñárritu. For the record, I just want to graciously show my gratitude to all the committee members for hearing us today. To Ms. Bivens, of course, for joining me. She wasn't able to come to Carson City simply because of her job and everything, but we're close family friends, and I appreciate the fact that we got to present a constituent bill to all of you. And we graciously thank everyone, and we'll work with Assemblyman Urick on the conceptual amendment to get it at the right slot. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. With that, I will go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 294. Our last item of business today is public comment. So if there's anyone here wishing to make public comment, remember, public comment is not about the bill that we just heard, but about anything else under the purview of this committee. Not seeing anyone. Broadcasting, will you open the lines, please, for public comment?
To provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Hi, Madam Chair. I was calling in support, but the call dropped. I was wondering if I could still call my testimony for the record.
Sure, I'll go ahead and accept it. We understand technology. Please proceed.
Okay, and I'm actually at the Grand Sawyer building, so kind of ironic. But my name is Isaac Torrio with Charge 60, representing Giffords. Honored to support SB 289. Giffords urges strong support of SB 294, which would create a strong child access prevention law and requires dealers to provide locking devices and notices about the law. Comprehensive child care access to prevention and safe storage laws are incredibly effective tools to curb gun deaths and injuries among children and teens. Household guns out there are the most easily accessible firearms to youth. A major source of weapons used in school shootings, youth suicides, and unintentional shooting deaths among children. Studies have shown that 70 to 90% of guns used in youth suicides, unintentional shootings among children, and school shootings perpetrated by shooters under the age of 18 or acquired from the home or the homes of relatives or friends. The evidence is clear. SB 294 and laws that ensure firearms are kept out of the reach of Nevada's youth and will save lives. Committee, we urge you to support SB 294. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And because you are at Grant Sawyer, I would like to ask, is there anyone else there at Grant Sawyer with you wishing to make testimony? Are you still there? Okay, next caller.
Yes, Madam Chair?
Yes, I just was wondering if there was anyone else there with you.
No, I'm here by myself.
Okay, thank you. So again, committee secretary, please make sure that's documented as a support testimony, and we will return back to public comment.
There are no other callers to provide public comment at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I will then go ahead and close public comment. That concludes our order of business for today. Stay tuned. We do not have committee scheduled for tomorrow, but stay tuned. As you know, things are at this point just popping up. Agendas just are popping up. So pay attention to that. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. This meeting is adjourned.